I'm Niall Ross, for anyone who didn't already know that, and I've been working with Glorp for 10 years, and I've been pushing it to do pretty weird stuff for a good deal of that. About 3.5 years ago, Alan gave me the Glorp passwords, and Cincom put me in charge of Glorp, and last year I gave a talk in which I attempted to cover the whole of Glorp in 1.5 hours, and that turned out not to be long enough, because there's quite a lot of Glorp. And on Monday, I gave a getting started Glorp tutorial, also in 1.5 hours, and that turned out to be long enough to get started. That is, you could indeed get started in 1.5 hours. Perhaps not quite as much started even as I had planned, but that's it. And in this talk, I've got half an hour to get from a legacy database with no Glorp or documentation in theory to the Glorp map model, which I'm going to refactor, and then I'm going to connect the refactored model to a web app and display its data. So basically going to have to do quite a lot, so I better get moving. So first of all, a quick reminder, what is Glorp? If you were in the voice talk, you actually heard this mentioned. You heard the phrase, impedance mismatch problem. That's what it's all about. Glorp's job is to hide the fact that relational databases have a very different idea of how to model data from those of recurring systems. It's the brainchild of Alan Knight, and Alan worked on TopLink, and that taught him a great deal about relational mapping, and you know the saying, make it run, make it right. Glorp was Alan getting TopLink right. Quick overview of the architecture. The key point is Glorp's got to model the domain. It's got to model the database, and then it's got to have a clever set of descriptors and mappers and joins, the third part, to model, to connect the two. And basically Glorp's cleverness comes in solving that third problem. So, this talk, round-tripping Glorp. Well, we're going to start in the mapping tool. The scenario I'm envisaging is an existing legacy database, maybe old, maybe very ill-documented, maybe the last guy who knew what the schema was like left a long time ago. And you could earn a little money in Smalltalk if you could connect to it, maybe provide some new function, provide some web app using the data, whatever. So you want to do this, you want to do this fast. So first of all, we want to look at how you would get a Glorp model of the database. Then how you might look at that model to understand it and clean up the model that you had. Then I'm going to refactor the Glorp model, and that will allow me to demonstrate a new feature which I've added to Glorp, or maybe an existing feature I've made work as it should rather than as it did. Then I'm going to prove that the refactoring works by actually using it in a very simple web app. I'm going to do all this on a real application. And the real application, no surprise for those of you who came to the tutorial, is whiskey. And let me just demonstrate, therefore, that it is. This is a real-world application. This is not a hello world application. So here is the front end of it. Here's the site. I can go into the site. I can maybe look at some products. I can let's look for Haben, for example. Spell or something. So we have a large number of bottles of that particular malt, and let's look at one. And here we can see it's been matured in bourbon, and it doesn't actually have a body, a description. So I could get out a bottle, and I could give myself a dram, and I could write in a description. or possibly I could instead finish the talk, so maybe I should stop at this point, having I hope satisfied you that this is a real application. It's a realistic thing. So much for the front end. Now it's time to look at the back end. You have to do some work on this. So let's first of all, therefore, open an ObjectStudio image. And now let me demonstrate there is nothing up my sleeves. We do not have any cars beginning with RAM 242. We do not have any casks or bottles or prepared stuff. And we don't have any descriptor system in this. We have a large number of abstract descriptor systems that are going to describe various generic things or be able to read the metadata of databases, but there is no descriptor system. By the way, can everyone read the code up there? Is that large enough? Yep, I guess so. Okay. So basically, I am starting from scratch. I have a completely empty atlas that I have prepared, which contains nothing. And I have the ability to connect to my database. And so I'm going to do that. I'm now connected. So, kindly.
Which kind of database is that?
This is Postgres. This is Postgres over the protocol 3 sockets drivers that Arden was talking about that we've now got. So we're future-proofed on Postgres. So, it reads my database and it finds that I have a large number of tables, and at this point I instantly cancel because I've now done my deliberate mistake. I opened up an information schema. What I was about to do was, having developed a meta Glorp model that was going to able to read our arbitrary Postgres databases, I was now going to read Postgres' meta model of how it reads databases. Very interesting thing to do, but not what I was going to do in this talk. So let's go to the public schema, where I'm more likely to actually find tables that relate to some application that it wants to do. So now I find a large number of applications to do with casks and bottles and so on and so forth. So now I'm prepared to say, right, let's take all the tables and let's just read them in. So now I have the bottom end of my Glorp model. If we just go back here and step back a couple. Okay, all this bit database table, all Glorp's map to the tables we have that way. Okay, so we have that. Next, obviously, I would like some classes. I need the top end of my Glorp model. I don't have any. I'm starting from completely from scratch. So I basically say, generate me some classes. Where will I put these classes? Well, RAM 242 sounds like a good package name. That was the one I demonstrated I didn't have. Now let's have it. Okay, takes a minute or two. There, it's a reasonably sizable domain model here. But if I wait patiently, there I have all my classes. I now have the top end of that in that diagram that I demonstrated, and an intermediate end. So let me just actually persuade you that that is the case. So here I look at, let's say, cask, and let's actually read the first 10 rows of cask. Okay, so you can see I have various casks, Brooklyn, Sherry, Madeira, whatever, in which to mature my whiskey. And let's actually go to the cask class. I've created D242 cask. It's clever enough to know that it doesn't want that underscore that was in the cask table, but of course this is a fairly simple mapping. This is by no means the kind you'd end up with. And I basically say, let's inspect it, and I have a large number of cask objects, and I can basically look at their values and do various things. Now, at this point, I have a starting point, and I've saved myself a great deal of work. Dirk and I have done a lot of work on this, so that, first of all, the code it generates is somewhat more human usable. It's genuinely the code, a great deal of which you might be happy to stick with as you carry on evolving your application. And secondly, when it gets stuck, it would often, in the old days, if it wasn't a schema that it could understand every single part of, it would fall over. Now, if it turns out that there's a default value in one of these tables, and this default value is calculated by a function that works on the date, and then looks at some basic hard-coded reference and does some calculation, and it kind of, just can't parse that. It just puts a useful string of the thing it couldn't parse into the default value with an automatic error. So when you're working away at your model, the thing will pop up and say, okay, I couldn't figure this one out, but you, human being, can probably read this and figure out what the DBA put in.
You use database constraints when doing this?
Yes, very much.
Can you, what happens to views of your database?
Okay, in the current version, views are not there. I have coded, that stuff is available and it's coming along the line. And I would be delighted to make it available to anyone who actually wants to use it. But you wouldn't, if you load up the current stuff you wouldn't have to. Okay, so that was legacy. Obviously, at this point, you do a certain amount of cleanup, and this talk is not about doing that basic cleanup. So I'm going to close this and open. Here's one I prepared earlier. This model. Close one image there, close the entire thing. That, and now here is where, having done some very obvious and simple Glorp things, I try and do some more clever things. So first of all, having got my classes, obviously I start stripping, I do a global refactoring to get rid of the T42 graphics, I do very solid cleanups, and I get the stuff into the modeling tool so that I can actually understand the name. The scenario is that I came to this fairly new with some customer who said, look, we can't do anything with this, it's static, can you work on it? So now I take it into the model and I study this model and I can basically look around and try and get an idea of what's happening. And I do various trivial cleanups. And then I decide to actually look at my requirements. So for this example, the requirement is there's a thing called Horeca down here. Now, this was my concession to multilingualism, which unfortunately I gathered from my German friends. Horeca doesn't mean anything even in German, it doesn't mean something in Dutch, so it's not actually achieving very much. But a Horeca is a customer type. So cafes and bars might be one type of customer. If we wanted to offer a certain type of whiskey, certain selections that went well together. Elite hotels, prestige hotels might be another customer type. We would take another set of collections. So basically, you want to try and develop your market this way. So you want to have a website where a customer could go and actually see what the recommended selection for your type of business was. So you're now going to tweak the model in order to do that. So obviously, at this point, if I had worlds enough in time, obviously I started late, it's now 11:49, but if I had worlds enough in time, I would go new and add an attribute of, in this case, a dictionary. Let's say I want to try out this idea, so I know I have picture classes with references to actual picture locations and size and details. I have the bottles with all sorts of the alcohol by volume and how much it costs and so on. So I'm going to try and create my website by putting those together. So on the Horeca, I just want to have a dictionary object that's going to be mapped with the keys, meaning the pictures of the values being bottled or something. That lets me get started. But in fact, this talk would quickly turn into how slowly can Niall Ross find a typo if I did that. So here is indeed one I prepared earlier, which has actually the answer. So I'm going to talk through the answer because that actually is quite interesting. Okay, so this is what I basically got for free with a little cleanup from the automatic reading tool. Here we have the descriptor system. There's also, if I look at the class model, the class model is quite useful because it simply shows the description. So yes, here was what I already had, and now literally I'm just telling it, right, I want to add an attribute to which I give the inspired name of bottle dict. It's going to have keys, parameter 242 picture, and the values are going to be bottles. And that's all the class model has to know. and then I go to my descriptor, and here is where I'm able to do something where I say, don't try this at home. This will not work on any currently released Glorp, but it will work in future. So if I declare a new mapping, dictionary mapping, I give it its attribute name, bottle dict wow. The reference class is bottle. In most mappings, there's only one reference class. This is a dictionary mapping, of course, and the basic reference class will be the value. So at this point, we already know we've got values. Now, this is all stuff you could have done in Glorp today. You could decide that maybe you were going to have a dictionary where the keys were, say, the brand name, and the values were the full bottle object, or the keys were any other simple object. But in fact, I don't want that. Here, I'm going to have my attribute name, key. Obviously, this is actually mapping to a dictionary association, key value. The reference class is going to be picture, not some simple type. And the point about this is it's not in the scope. If I took you around the model, which I will not do because I've got about 10 minutes, you would see that the reference to picture is not in the scope of the HORICA or anything it has an existing foreign key to. So we actually have to tell it, okay, you better join, in this case, a very simple join, kindly join picture tables product to product tables field name, and that sort of reminds it that's the way you're going to get it. All you need is a path from the key to the value, obviously, and then you can map any dictionary. And this is something you could not do in basic Glorp, where dictionaries were limited. And it was frustrating because, yes, you could have very simple dictionary objects where it told you nothing you didn't know, just the way of organizing the data you were covering. But often you use a dictionary because you're not sure yet you're going to create a real class. You've often, I mean, I'm sure all of you have been in situations where you're putting together data and you're just thinking, would this combination work, you know, and I just want to throw it together, so I'll just say, oh yeah, shove it in a dictionary, have a dictionary or dictionary with dictionary, put it together, get the data up, see what it looks like, and now I can figure out what my class structure is. So, as well as this particular example, where maybe a dictionary is good enough as the end result, you often want a dictionary intermediate, and this ability to map it is useful. So that was why we worked on adding this, and basically, as I said, if you try it at home, you quickly see it falls out. So having defined it, I just tell the thing, dictionary mapping, and those few lines of code are all that I need. And to prove now that I am really, what I'm telling you is really true, I open my modeling tool again. This time I open my, okay, there's my particular system. I connect to my database as before. Now I see all my cleaned up model, and at this point, if I go down to HORICA, inspect it, I happen to note I've got 3, and I happen to note if I go into the third one, there's my bottle dict, lazily it's required, and here I have. Okay, so for this particular elite group, I seem to think that I'm afraid triple wood, an art more traditional cask, an art bag, 10 years, and all the other ones would be a nice selection that would warm the hearts of their customers. Okay, so far so good. I promised you a web app, so to actually show that this could be done. So let's go back here, and let's go back to here. And all right, this is Jerry's talk. You saw that, the usual Apex stuff. This again, I've got it all loaded in. Just trust me, this is exactly the same model. You don't have to trust me. Actually, you can look here. View up on it. There we are. So there's our description for HORICA with its additional stuff added. Now, here is the answer to your question. You stole my thunder. But in fact, here we see this thing, Glorp Atlas system in VisualWorks. And the most interesting thing here is this class with the superb name, more inspectable. Let me show it here so you can actually read it. More inspectable message archiver, which if I was really honest, I would have said not quite so completely uninspectable message archiver, because I persuaded myself the name was too wrong. You will find, if you actually browse references to this and so on, you will sooner or later get DA news and the RB as you try to inspect things, because it's not that much more inspectable, but the point is it won't actually fall over, you can load it in. Essentially, Glorp has a messaging chart whose main purpose, of course, is to construct SQL blocks out of view. You give it small talk blocks thinking that you're doing collection protocol, and it produces the stuff. But it has a nice additional feature that it can actually eat any messages you just want to be eaten instead of sent. You in ObjectStudio prepared a model, and that model had some class-side annotation. Now you've saved that model to store and reloaded it in VisualWorks. Now you can do stuff with it in VisualWorks. Maybe you see you want to rename the class. Now, you don't want to rename the class and then go back to ObjectStudio and have ObjectStudio say, hey, I can't show you these pretty pictures anymore. That class, you know, I can't find that class. So by having those annotations in VisualWorks, you ensure that if you do any refactoring, you're okay, and it's still there, and you can go back, you can then go back to ObjectStudio and with the nice visual tools, do a much more sustained, general piece of work, and you haven't lost anything. But on the other hand, of course, those annotations will actually try to, they think they're in ObjectStudio, so they'll try and do things. So this is a very trivial little package which you can load, which basically lets the ObjectStudio load and basically eats. Whenever ObjectStudio comes along and tries to do its stuff, it just eats the log, eats the message then, and says, you know, shut up. And they just silently don't follow you. There are several other things with Glorp Atlas. You can, in fact, do almost everything I've shown you in VisualWorks. It's just you won't enjoy it because you have none of these nice visual tools. You're having to do everything programmatically, and you better have a good memory for a complex model because you don't get any pictures or any guidance and so on. But the domain layers are now shared between the two. So, having done all that, let's finally get to the bring up our Apex and Sue and say run. Yes, please allow to receive. And somewhere I have the quickest way of doing this is just here. So, okay, here's my website. Let's actually look at my demo. And if I look at it, then there are quite a few lists. So basically, it's got the database, it's got that data, and there are, from the key side, it's got the pictures, and from the class side, it's grabbed just a bit of data. What's the brand, what's the name, and what's the year it was moved from the distillery into the car, and so on and so forth. And so, getting back to my slides. So yeah, you people who are coming in at the end, you're getting the talk. This is now the 5 seconds, the 5 seconds version of the talk. I hope you agree. Okay, so what did I tell you? What did all you guys who just come in miss? You missed me explaining what Glorp was. You missed me connecting to a database about which I knew nothing and reading a Glorp descriptor system. You missed me generating an acceptable set of classes. And you missed me proving that I could then read the rows and actually read the classes, and that actually worked. You missed me opening the one I prepared earlier where I cleaned up the generated classes so that it actually fit for use. And you missed me showing in the modeling tool how I could, wander around the domain. You missed me showing that I could then refactor and have a dictionary mapping, which, as I said, none of you can't do all this yet. You don't yet have a Glorp that does it, but soon, none of the release reports in any of the places yet do that, but the upcoming will do that. And then finally, I went to Apex and I showed graphics data to actually display the new website, the new webpage that my scenario had involved, and there it is. Okay, basically a collection, a suitable collection for prestige customers to put together. These ones will go well together. These ones will motivate your customers to come to your hotel and so on. And at that point, we are pretty well done. These are all the various people involved. My thanks to Dirk, he's providing all these tool front end to all this stuff, and so on. My thanks to Jerry and Vlad and Laura for providing the Apex and stuff like that. And basically Suzanne and Co are at the back. And basically, if this didn't motivate you to think anything about ObjectStudio and so on, but you felt that you really wanted to drink a whiskey, then Dirk will be only too happy to receive input. And we're I think done, and hopefully, yeah. Does that say 1200?
Yeah.
My God, too tall. Be amazed.